More and more continuous glucose monitors, or CGMs, are coming to the market, which is super exciting. And one of those is a Chinese CGM called SIBIONICS. I got my hands on two sensors, and this is not a sponsored video, so it's a completely unbiased review. I'll give you a full review, the good and the bad, because at some times it was a bit of a mixed bag. But it's good enough that it should, and it has, earned a place at the table when it comes to CGMs. I'll share a little bit about SIBIONICS, about the pricing and the availability, but the bulk of this review is going to be my experience. We're wearing the product. I wore two sensors, so that's 28 days of wear. I'll be comparing it directly to another really well-known CGM. I'm Christelle from Diabetes Strong, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes since 1997, and I've been wearing a CGM since around 2015. I started out wearing a Medtronic sensor, and then I moved over to Dexcom, which is now my preferred CGM. I have also tried the FreeStyle Libre sensor. It was never the right fit for me, and it wasn't good enough that I wanted to switch over from Dexcom. And why am I saying all of this? Well, it gives you an idea of my experience wearing CGMs. Also, I wore the SIBIONICS at the same time as I wore my Dexcom G7, so I've included that comparison in this video as well. Let's get into it. SIBIONICS has been around since 2015, and according to the website, they have 600,000 users worldwide. I assume most of those are in China and the surrounding regions, as they only just got CE marked as of October 30th, 2023. It's not FDA approved yet, but you can order it in the EU and the UK, as well as some countries in Asia. Here we have the SIBIONICS sensor. You can see here compared to the Dexcom G6, the Dexcom G7, and the FreeStyle Libre 3. So I think size-wise, it looks way better than the G6. You can see that here. It's thinner, it's just smaller. When we then compare it to the FreeStyle Libre 3, well, obviously that's a much smaller sensor. And now that we're comparing them, let's also talk a little bit about functionality. I think it's relevant to look at SIBIONICS, Dexcom G7, and the FreeStyle Libre 3 side by side. So the first thing I look at is sensor duration. So that's how long does the sensor stay on the body. And you can see here, SIBIONICS is 14 days, so 2 weeks. Same as Libre 3, which is actually longer than the Dexcom G7. Supposedly the G7 will last 2 weeks soon, but right now it's only 10 days. And then we have the MARD. That's how we measure accuracy when it comes to CGMs. MARD stands for mean absolute relative difference. That's fine in this context, but the most important thing is that the lower the MARD, the more accurate the sensor. So you can see here, SIBIONICS is definitely not the most accurate sensor when we just look at the MARD. However, MARDs start to be measured a little bit differently between sensors. That makes it really hard to compare, but at least when we look at it here, it's the most inaccurate sensor compared to G7 and Libre 3. And then there's the updates. That means how often does the sensor data update? How often does it send your blood sugar reading from the sensor to your phone or your receiver? And you can see here, SIBIONICS is every 5 minutes, just as the Dexcom G7, whereas the FreeStyle Libre is every minute. And then we have the age indication, which simply means who is this sensor approved for? As you can see here, SIBIONICS is actually only for adults, whereas Dexcom G7 and Libre 3 are also approved for children, Dexcom G7 all the way down to 2 years and up. That's fairly high level, and of course it doesn't cover everything. I'll talk way more about accuracy later on in this video, as I did a lot of finger sticks, as well as wore the Dexcom G7 at the same time to get a good feel about the accuracy. Let me first show you the SIBIONICS sensor and the components, and then I'll talk more about how I thought it performed when it comes to accuracy, wearability, and user-friendliness. Each SIBIONICS sensor comes in a box like this. Let's open up the box and see what's in it. In the box, you'll find two components. There's this blue turquoise sensor applicator, and then there's a sensor pack. And you need to sample this before applying the sensor. You want to peel off this foil, and then you also need to peel off this plastic cap. And then you push the two together. You need to do that on a hard surface. And now they're assembled and ready to go. You peel off the safety clip, and then you simply apply it to your skin and push the button. I found the insertion process easy and painless, and setting it up in the app was really intuitive. Once you've started the sensor in the app, the warm-up period is 1 hours. That means it's going to be 1 hour before you're actually going to start seeing your blood sugar readings. That is half an hour more than the Dexcom G7, but it's the same as the FreeStyle Libre 3. The sensor works with a phone app. There's no receiver. It works with Android 8.0 and above, and it works with iOS 13.6 and above. I am currently on iOS 17.3.1. and it works just fine for me. What I found really interesting is that I wore SIBIONICS on my arm as it's approved for, and I didn't have any compression lows, not like I do with Dexcom G7, and I didn't bump it on anything, and it didn't fall off. It really stayed on. The sensor tape isn't that big. It's not a big surface area, but it's stuck on really well. The first sensor I wore for a week, and then I had to add an overlay tape because the edges was kind of like coming up. And the second sensor, I didn't have to add an overlay tape at all. But the overlay tape, the one that comes in the box, is actually pretty brilliant. This is the overlay tape that I wore, and look at this. I've never seen this before in any other overlay tape. This is plastic edge all the way around. It really kept the sensor secure. It also makes it really easy to apply the overlay tape. Now let's talk accuracy. As I mentioned, I wore the Dexcom G7 as well as SIBIONICS at the same time. I also did a lot of finger sticks. On average, I was doing 3 finger sticks a day. So I think I got a pretty solid idea of how accurate this sensor is. Of course, finger sticks and a CGM reading is not always going to be the same. Mainly because the CGM measures your blood sugars in the fluid underneath the skin, whereas, well, when you do a finger stick, you measure in your blood. But when blood sugars are stable, those readings should be fairly similar. We know that the MARDs are fairly similar, but not quite, between Dexcom G7 and SIBIONICS at 8.2 and 8.8% respectively. And I did find that there was a difference between the two sensors, and it was a very consistent difference. My Dexcom readings were consistently above my finger sticks, and my SIBIONICS was consistently below my finger stick readings. So I guess one can discuss sort of what's worst. On average, my Dexcom was 7 milligrams per deciliter higher, and my SIBIONICS was 15 milligrams per deciliter lower than my finger sticks. Averages are great, but I think it's also worth to look at, well, for example, when the sensors were off, how off were they? So when it comes to SIBIONICS, it was 68 milligrams per deciliter above finger sticks and 32 milligrams per deciliter below finger sticks at its most inaccurate readings. Looking at Dexcom, Dexcom was 32 milligrams per deciliter above and 25 milligrams per deciliter below at its most inaccurate reading. So SIBIONICS did have more extreme outliers, and that's also consistent with a higher MARD. In these situations, it would have been nice to be able to calibrate the SIBIONICS sensor like you can with the Dexcom. But just as FreeStyle Libre, you cannot calibrate the SIBIONICS sensor. Another interesting thing was to see how quickly the SIBIONICS sensor caught up to my blood sugars when they were changing rapidly. My observation was that the SIBIONICS sensor seemed to catch on to rapidly changing blood sugars a little slower than my Dexcom G7. I don't have enough data to confirm whether or not this was a consistent pattern, but it happened enough that it caught my attention. But overall, at least for me, this sensor performed pretty well. Most of the readings were within 20 milligrams per deciliter or the plus minus 20%, which is kind of like the rule of thumb for CGM accuracy. What I did find interesting is that when you look at the SIBIONICS user guide, it does not say that it's approved for dosing. I found this to be a bit odd, and I'm not sure why, with a MARD below 9%, that it's not approved for that. It could be that not enough clinical data was provided to get that approval, but that's just me speculating. When it comes to the user experience, I found this sensor to be pretty intuitive and easy to use. Since the sensor is not yet approved in the US, I had to download the app through something called Test Flight. That wasn't a problem. I just had to acknowledge that, hey, this is a test app and it's not been approved yet. If you're in a country where the sensor is already approved, you just download the app like you'll download any other app. Remember, there's no receiver, so you do have to have a compatible smartphone. Once downloaded, you can then choose whether or not you want the app to display your blood sugars in millimole per liter or milligram per deciliter. You'll find everything in that app. There's no external reporting software like you have for Dexcom or FreeStyle Libre. Everything is right there in the app. You can download your reports. You can even download all of your data in a spreadsheet format. I know all my data geeks are going to love that. And the reporting includes all the usual stats such as your average glucose and your time in range. Like the other CGMs, you can also share your data with your medical team. You do that directly in the app as well. And you can share your data in real time with whomever you like. I've never felt the need to use that feature, but I know it's important to a lot of people, so I wanted to include it here. And then there are the alerts. They are not user-friendly. They're user-friendly enough to set. You just go into settings and then you set your alerts or you turn them off. The only one you cannot turn off is the urgent low that's 55 milligrams per deciliter. The reason why I do not think they're user-friendly is that once an alarm sounds, it will continue to sound every 5 minutes until your blood sugars are back in range. You can't clear an alert like you can in the Dexcom G7 app. I ended up turning off all of my alarms, all of the highs, all of the low alarms. They were so annoying. Obviously, that's not the ideal use of a CGM, but that was too annoying for me. It takes a little while for blood sugars to change, and I don't need a reminder every 5 minutes when I've reacted after that first alarm. So it was a little bit too aggressive on the blood sugar alarms, but it did not alert me once my sensor was about to expire. It would be nice to be warned when the sensor is about to expire. It notes when the sensor is inserted, and then 24 hours before it expires, it starts a countdown. You can, of course, put a note on your own calendar, but I would prefer a little alert. I'm sure it's just a question of getting used to it. I'm just used to being alerted, so when it stopped working, it was a little bit of a surprise to me. Another bummer is that this CGM does not integrate with any insulin pumps or smart pens. It has not been CE marked for that long, so maybe that's something we're going to see down the line. But logic dictates that they probably need to get approved for dosing decisions before they'll ever be allowed to integrate with a hybrid closed-loop pump. If this is something that you're interested in trying, you can order directly from the SIBIONICS website, and here you can also see pricing. And remember, you do not need a prescription. Let's go to the Danish side. Why, you ask? Well, I'm Danish and I will be spending a few months back in Denmark this summer, and it just so happens that I'm not allowed to buy Dexcom or FreeStyle Libre in Denmark because I'm no longer part of the Danish healthcare system. So even though I'm paying cash, I'm not allowed to buy any of these products. So this might be an option. Here we are on the SIBIONICS website. And this is kind of interesting. You can see here, there's actually an Easter sale. Obviously, that won't be year-round, but I think this is the first time that I've seen a medical device company that has sales. So anyway, good to know. Let's go to the cart. And I want to start shopping. So there's some different options. It's 62.99 euro. This is great. So here you can choose how many you want and which kind of measuring unit you want. So let's just choose one. Add to cart. And there's the Easter sale again, a little funny. Want to check out? And here you then choose where you want it set to. So if I want it to Denmark, you see this is a Danish currency, 456 krona or 480 without the discount. But yeah, that's how you do it. You then enter your address and it'll tell you how much the shipping is. But it's fairly easy to use. It's like any other online shopping site. If we look at the FreeStyle Libre 3, which you can get in some EU countries without a prescription, the pricing is fairly similar. This is from the German site, and here one FreeStyle Libre 3 sensor is 65 euro and 90 cents plus shipping. And that was SIBIONICS. A pretty good sensor. It's not amazing, but it's not horrible either. I won't be switching from Dexcom to SIBIONICS, but I do see it as a really solid option if I run out of sensors when I'm back in Denmark. Over the years, I've reviewed a lot of CGMs. I reviewed the FreeStyle Libre 2, the FreeStyle Libre 3, Dexcom G6, Dexcom G7, as well as Eversense. And you can see all of those reviews in this playlist. And if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.